Tell me if this feels familiar. You record a voice message, hit play, and suddenly you cringe so hard your whole soul tries to leave your body. You think, that's not me. Why do I sound like that? Thousands of people have skipped career opportunities, avoided public speaking, even refused to record family videos, all because they couldn't stand the sound of their own voice. But what if I told you that this discomfort isn't vanity? It's psychology, deep, ancient psychology, and it reveals far more about who you are than you think. Today, we're diving into why you don't like your voice and why your brain is the real culprit. Let's start with a moment you've lived. You're in a quiet room, maybe recording a voicemail or rehearsing a speech. You hit play, and as soon as your voice echoes back, something inside you tightens. It's a weird mix of embarrassment and confusion. It's almost like hearing a stranger who somehow sounds like you but also doesn't. This reaction is so universal that psychologists have studied it for decades, and the first big reason behind it is surprisingly mechanical. When you speak, you hear your voice in two ways at once. First, through the air, like everyone else.
Second, through vibrations inside your skull. That internal vibration, the one only you can ever hear, adds warmth, depth, and resonance. It's like your brain has been applying a cozy filter to your voice your entire life. But when you hear a recording, that filter vanishes. Now you're hearing the cold, external version, the version everyone else hears. Your brain reacts the way it does when it sees your face from a strange angle. That's not the identity I know. It's a slap in the face to your sense of self. But there's a deeper layer, because the voice you hear in your head has never truly been judged. The recorded one suddenly is. Your voice isn't just a sound, it's a story. It carries your fears, your confidence, your childhood, your insecurities. Every syllable carries a piece of your identity. So when you hear your voice played back, it's not just an audio file, it's a mirror, one that reflects who you are, without the soft blur that memory normally provides. And here's the truth many of us feel. We don't actually dislike the sound of our voice. We dislike what it reveals, the vulnerabilities we try to hide, the anxious little tremors we didn't know were there, the version of us that isn't perfectly polished or controlled.
Your recorded voice becomes evidence, proof that you're not as together as you hoped. And there's a final, evolutionary reason your brain reacts so strongly. Long before technology, your voice was a powerful survival tool. It signaled your strength, your social rank, your emotional state. If your voice cracked, it could expose fear. If it sounded too soft, it could lower your status. Your brain evolved to constantly monitor your voice, not just how it sounds, but how it represents you. That's why hearing a recording, something you can't control or adjust in the moment, feels like a threat. It's a loss of control over your social identity, and that discomfort hits fast and hard. But here's the most surprising part. The very things you dislike about your voice, the slight hesitation, the unique pitch, the way it cracks when you're passionate, that's often the reason other people connect with you. It's the texture of your humanity. It's the unfiltered proof of a real person speaking. What you hear as a flaw, others hear as authenticity. So next time you hear your own voice and feel that familiar cringe, try to remember, you're not just hearing a sound. You're hearing the unfiltered, vulnerable, and completely human story of you. And that's a story worth listening to.
Here's the truth that almost nobody believes at first. People like your voice far more than you do. Why? It's because they've never heard the version that you hear inside your own head. They only know the external version, the one that travels through the air, the one you hear on a recording and think sounds strange. To them, that strange voice is completely normal. It's familiar. It might even be comforting. Think about it for a second. The voice you cringe at is the same voice your friends respond to across a crowded room. It's the voice your loved ones have learned to trust. It's the one your coworkers recognize on a call without even looking. A stranger might hear it and find it warm or interesting. The very same voice you think betrays all your insecurities might actually be what makes you approachable. And those tiny imperfections you obsess over, that little bit of breathiness, the way your pitch wavers when you're passionate, the slight quiver, those aren't flaws. Those are the traits that make you sound human. So the truth is this, your voice doesn't sound wrong, It just sounds real. You've just never been able to hear it the way the rest of the world does. But let's go even deeper, because there's a powerful psychological bias at play here that shapes this entire experience. Humans are biologically wired to notice their flaws much faster than their strengths. Psychologists call it the negativity bias, and your recorded voice triggers it perfectly. The moment you press play, your brain doesn't just listen, it scans. It's actively hunting for awkward tones, for rushed words, for any audible sign of nervousness, for anything that another person could possibly judge. This instinct is ancient. It comes from a time when being aware of our own flaws helped our ancestors avoid mistakes that could cost them social status or even their safety. But in our modern world, that instinct completely backfires. We end up scrutinizing tiny details that don't matter, things that, frankly, no one else even notices. And here's the kicker. That discomfort you feel when you listen to your voice, it is not a sign that your voice is bad. It's a sign that your brain is trying way too hard to protect you from imaginary threats. It's a self-defense mechanism, disguised as self-criticism. But there's an even stranger phenomenon working against you. It's something called the identity jolt effect. When the voice you hear on a recording doesn't match the voice you hear in your head, your brain experiences a tiny psychological shock. It's almost like meeting a version of yourself from a parallel universe. It's unsettling.
It's unfamiliar, and our brains are wired to feel discomfort around unfamiliar things. This identity jolt happens in less than a second, but its emotional impact can last long after you've stopped the audio. You see, you're not actually reacting to the sound of your voice. You're reacting to the difference between the person you think you are and the person you sound like you are. That gap, no matter how small, feels enormous. But what if you could transform that jolt into something powerful? Because the more you confront it, the more you start to reshape your own self-image. Here's the good news. Your relationship with your own voice can change. And it doesn't require years of practice or expensive microphones. First, simple exposure rewires everything. The more you record yourself, just reading a page from a book, talking through an idea, practicing a presentation, the faster your brain adapts. That feeling of strangeness begins to fade, sometimes in just a few weeks. Second, make a conscious decision to accept that your recorded voice is your true voice to others. Once you embrace that fact, the unfamiliarity vanishes. It becomes normal, expected, even trusted. Third, change how you listen. Stop listening for mistakes. Instead, try listening for the meaning behind your words. Listen for the tone, for the emotion. Your voice carries a depth you've never noticed because you've always been listening to judge, not to understand. And fourth, remember that imperfections create connection. People don't connect with flawless robotic voices. They connect with voices that feel human. The moment you stop fighting your voice, something shifts. Your confidence rises. Your presence changes. Your communication becomes more authentic. And this brings us to the final and most important insight. In the end, the reason you can't stand the sound of your own voice isn't because it's bad. It's because it's honest. Your voice reveals the pieces of you that your conscious mind tries to hide. Your true emotions, your real confidence level, your raw, unfiltered presence. And when you finally face that honesty, when you accept the voice that the world already knows and maybe even loves, something remarkable happens. Your voice becomes not something to cringe at, but something to claim. Because the sound of your voice is the sound of your story, and it's time you finally heard it with kindness.
All right, before you click away, I need you to hear this, and yes, I know the irony of me telling you to love your voice after we just unpacked why it makes you cringe. But seriously, your voice is powerful. It's the sound of every victory, every comeback, every time you said, you know what, I'm doing this anyway. So don't hide it just because it feels weird on your phone speaker. Honestly, everyone sounds weird on their phone speaker, even me, and I'm literally an avatar. If this video gave you that little spark of, hey, maybe I'm not as awkward as I thought, then hit subscribe, binge a few more, and let's keep discovering all the odd, hilarious, and inspiring things our brains do. And remember, your voice, it's way better than you think.